You ever wonder what is considered DX in ham radio, or what DX actually means? Is your DX the same as my DX? Stay tuned and find out next. My name is Lucas, ham radio call sign W6AER. Welcome to the channel. So the question of the day, what exactly does DX mean in amateur radio? I know you may have heard the word tossed around a lot in ham radio circles, but perhaps never gave it much thought. Well, I have. In fact, I gave it so much thought I even wrote a book about it. The simple and perhaps overly simple answer is just simply distance. But this is far from a brilliant answer. The more complicated answer is it's all relative. What is DX to me may not be DX to you, and vice versa. Let me explain. If you're on the HF bands, meaning 10 through 160 meters, though technically 160 meter is medium wave, but just go with it. DX is generally considered anything outside your country, certainly outside a given continent. Here in the US, Mexico, Canada as well, and also Alaska and Hawaii are not so much considered DX to us. Meaning, when someone calls CQDX, meaning calling a station who is quote-unquote distant, they are looking for contacts beyond those that I just mentioned, so basically beyond our borders. For example, in my case, that would be Europe or Asia and so on. US and neighboring countries, not so much. Now, I am told that if one is in Europe, where borders are a lot closer than, let's say, here in the US, DX is often considered outside the continent, at least by some. Though, of course, it depends on who you ask. I've heard various answers when I asked my fellow European ham friends, so take that with a grain of salt. If you're watching this in Europe or outside the US, I would love to hear what your interpretation is. Perhaps leave a comment below. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's really curious. However, when one is on the 6 meter band, which would now be considered VHF or very high frequency, DX, as it is recognized on the HF bands, is not as commonplace. People like me, for example, even get excited working other states due to the completely different propagation characteristics. Openings beyond line of sight are always exciting for us. Here on the West Coast, it's even more of a challenge as we have nothing but water on one side. Basically, if I look out my window, next up is Hawaii, which is 5-hour flight and 3 time zones away. So we depend on openings. This is even more so as one moves up on the 2 meter band and above. Here I get very excited when I get to work Southern California from the San Francisco Bay Area, for example. This, of course, is without using a repeater, satellite, or EME, also known as moon bounce. Using these methods, making the above contacts is not so out of the ordinary, though can be quite a technical achievement, especially when we're talking about EME contacts, for example. Making a direct point-to-point contact, though, can be rather impressive, and not to mention involves some luck and timing. Meaning, having an opening, as well as having the other station in question also realizing that there's an opening. After all, contacts are two-way. Generally speaking, 2 meters and above are considered line of sight. Therefore, anything beyond line of sight is great in my opinion. Now, on the flip side of the bands, those on the 630 meter and 2200 meter bands, which sit well below the AM broadcast and the 160 meter amateur radio band, DX is defined very differently. These are very challenging bands with 1 watt ERP limit. ERP, by the way, stands for effective radiated power, so that's practically nothing. These bands are also causes of occasional fires. And yes, you heard me correctly. But this is another time for another video. Just take my word for it. On these super low bands, I was excited to decode signals from Texas. I would not even pay much attention to Texas or a Texas station here in California if it was on a 20 meter band, for example. No offense to anyone in Texas, it's just very easy to accomplish on an HF band, or the HF bands rather, even with poor conditions and a simple antenna. And then there are satellites and satellite DXing. Here it depends on what you are after and what kind of birds you are working. And birds, by the way, are ham radio slang for satellites. Satellite contacts are more about grid collection than DX entities, but many, like myself, collect both. If you're on an FM satellite only, or if you only work FM satellites rather, this will be harder if not impossible. These tend to have a much smaller footprint and are more congested. Only one frequency after all is used, and folks cannot spread out. Lots of QRM, especially on popular satellites or satellite repeaters like the one found on the ISS. ISS being the International Space Station. If you're in the US, you're likely mostly going to be working stateside on these satellites, perhaps Mexico, Canada, possibly Hawaii if you're on the West Coast, and the Caribbean if you're in the southern states, especially if you're lucky enough to be in the state of Florida. In Florida, you'll get a lot of entities, practically in all of your passes. Of course, with linear birds, which are single sideband, or satellites with larger footprints such as the RS-44, this range dramatically increases, meaning you will get a chance to work a lot more entities. If you operate on something like the IO-117, also known as the Green Cube and its packet repeater on 70 centimeter band, a good chunk of the world is yours. I have made many DX contacts here. I worked all over Europe, Oceania, South America, and Asia from my West Coast location here. I work Northern Europe and Japan regularly on this satellite. Now you're wondering, how is this possible? Well, the footprint is larger due to the higher orbit of the satellite. If you have not used the Green Cube yet, I'd really encourage you to give it a shot. It's a lot of fun. I would love to hear your best DX story in the comments below, or perhaps what DX contact you would like to have. Also, what bands do you like to operate? Do you agree with my assessment on what DX is? I would love to hear what you think. In conclusion, bottom line, DX is different depending on what you do and where you are. Your goals and even your setup are a factor as to what DX is to you. If you have a 20-meter dipole in an attic due to, let's say, an HOA regulation, you're likely more excited to catch the same DX, and logging it, which someone with a full-size tower may not even think of as DX, let's say, or may not even bother to log. Something to think about. But before I go, I have a tiny favor to ask. Would like to see more content like this? Please hit the bell button and subscribe. You'll be notified of future content, and please select all so you don't miss any new content. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Both are free and it will really help this channel out. Thank you for watching, and please check out some of the recommended videos. As we say, 7-3 and good DX. Until the next video, this is Lucas, W6AER.